everyone. I am Jamie Dawn, your evolutionary, revolutionary astrologer, bringing you your celestial wisdom. This is being recorded on December 10th. So I'm going to backtrack just a couple of days, kind of confirm some things that you guys have probably been experiencing, but also give you some heads up as the big activity really happens over the weekend, come, the 14th, 15th of this month. So, because we're going to have a Gemini full moon while Mercury also stations direct. And this full moon is going to be squaring off with Saturn while it's also canoodling or conjunct with Jupiter. So we've got some pretty intense energy as the weekend is arriving. So a lot of stuff is building up. But before we jump directly into it, let me give you a card for this week that we can meditate on, that maybe confirms some things that you've been experiencing, things like that. All right. So my handy dandy Celtic tarot deck, and I've got the 10 of Wands here. All right. And so with the 10 of Wands, it often means that we're taking on extra burdens. Maybe this week feels heavy, and it's appropriate with it being a full moon because we're wanting to let go of the things that have been weighing us down. And with this being a Gemini full moon, it's that mental energy. What have we been worrying about? Or what have we been gossiping about or talking about and no actions being taken, right? It has this weightedness feeling to it. And so what we're asking to do right now is to release all the things that have been burdening us and maybe socialize a little bit more, get out and circulate, or take a moment to just forget about all that heaviness and have an opportunity to be able to say, you know what? Yes, it's the end of a calendar year coming. We've completed a lot. We've done a lot and we've been through a lot. And so give yourself permission for just even a moment to breathe, take it in, let go, let your hair down, have some fun, forget about the worries and the cares. It's appropriate with it being the holiday season, which is a mixed bag, as we know, because I know many of us are missing loved ones that we feel should be present with us. And that's hard. And at the same time, there's light in the middle of the darkness. Because in just 2 weeks, we've got the sun ingressing into the sign of Capricorn, sending us into the darkest night here in the northern hemisphere of the year. And it's the winter solstice. I'll talk about that in our next video, but just putting those pins on the map that as we are working with the things that maybe have weighed us down, now we can release them. It's really perfect too, because Mercury, as I mentioned, stations direct on Sunday on the 15th. And we've got that full moon happening really Saturday night into Sunday morning. And so this week we may finally be able to say, okay, I can finally release this particular worry, or I can finally let go of this particular job or toxic relationship, or just anything that is creating this mental exhaustion. A lot of people don't realize, you're physically moving and that can be exhausting, but it's the mental energy that really can exhaust us. And so it's time to let it go. And, the energy for the weekend is really concentrated on this full moon and and Mercury stationing direct. So I do want to put a couple of pins on the map. On yesterday, Monday, the 9th, we might have felt some wounds being scratched as the sun was making a trine to Chiron, energizing activities or conversations from the past, maybe triggering some of that extra worries and fears that we have. And we're having to face them. We're having to deal with them. But I believe, especially with the sun in Sagittarius, as I mentioned, there's much more optimism and hope. And maybe the news that we're receiving this week, there can be a silver lining from it. There can be something that it may not be the best news in the world, or it may trigger a fear or an insecurity, but we can see that there's something better on the other side, that we get through it, that maybe we make that phone call or have that conversation and it's better than what we thought, right? Again, that mental energy. Now, I imagine with Mercury and Mars also, because remember, Mars is retrograde in fire signs, we're probably thinking about all the ways in our lives that we haven't manifested our heart's desire. That's hard. And if we go down this path of suffering, I was talking to Tatiana and my daughter, just today, actually, on the way to the gym, we were talking about how pain is part of life, suffering is a choice. And she said, it's so funny. She's doing this cool thing. She's doing poetry night. And she's writing these beautiful poems. And it's allowing her, because she's a therapist and she witnesses everyone's pain. This is an opportunity for her to be witnessed in her pain because she's going through a lot of grief right now and a lot of things that are being stirred up for her. But we were talking about, the reason I'm bringing this up is we were talking about suffering. And she said, I was just writing a poem around that yesterday. And I looked up the definition of what suffering was. And the one that stuck for her was that suffering is being conscious of the pain and choosing to focus on it. It's a conscious choice to be in the pain. So, as I mentioned to her, and this is my philosophy and my experience with grief, with suffering, with pain, is that I can feel pain, but the minute I attach a story to it and I reify that story, I tell that story over and over again, I start creating characters in the story and all this telenovela that I talk about all the time, all of a sudden, the pain turns into suffering. Because I'm like, I haven't gotten this. Somebody didn't say this or do this for me, or I am falling apart, and here's all the reasons why, and things like that. And now I have just created more pain or deeper pain in my life. So these Mercury and Mars retrograde times, especially with Mars being in the sign of Leo right now, it will continue to retrograde back into Cancer, activating some other areas that it was in a couple of months ago when it was in Cancer, where we were working with belonging, where's home, family. And I would imagine that, especially if our wounding or our pain resides with family members or people that we call beloved or we really care about, and we're not receiving some of those manifested desires, then it's going to be very difficult to keep a positive attitude, right? So I think the biggest thing that we have to allow ourselves is a lot of space and grace. And also make sure that you have someone that you trust, that you can feel safe with, that can witness your pain, that can maybe there's a creative outlet like Tatiana's doing with the poetry night, that gives you an opportunity to take that pain and channel it into something that maybe has a wonderful creative aspect to it, or just gives you some relief. So the other thing too is that at the beginning of next week, we're going to have Venus and Mars moving into an opposition, which can spice some things up. But again, we're dealing with desire versus reality versus, this idea of love, the way we give and receive love versus what motivates us. And maybe there's that lack of desire that shows up with Mars retrograde. And it's hard not to take that personally, especially if you're in a romantic relationship. Now, I will say this, those of you who have been in a bonded relationship during this Mercury retrograde, there may have been situations from the past or subject matters from the past that needed to be revisited and talked about again. Well, now with this Venus and Mars opposition, it could bring it all to a head. And, there's that sexual tension, you just get it out in the bedroom kind of thing. Or maybe there's a lack of motivation with Mars being retrograde to resolve it, or even to have that energy for that sexual attention, right? And it's hard not to take that personally. If you just started dating somebody during a Mercury retrograde, it's not a bad thing. Just take your time knowing that you are not going to know everything about this person. Try not to throw up too many red flags, but if they do show you that there's red flags here, walk away. However, I would say that there may be some things that get revealed over time that you're like, kind of wish I'd known that first, because I could have made a different decision, or maybe I wouldn't have made that decision, right? So some of that may be coming up as well, especially with Venus and Mars involved in that opposition. And, we may also, with Venus being in Aquarius and Mars in Leo, these are fixed signs. And so when we think about the energy and the situations that come up with this opposition, then we could get fixed on an idea of what we desire most in our lives and in our relationship. And we want other people to get on board. So this has an energy where we almost start trying to convince others or convert others to our idea of what we think is important to us or what we need in a relationship. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because we need to communicate what we want and need in relationship. But if the other person's not on board, then that tension could lead to other decisions made where the relationship ends, especially as we're in this full moon energy. So, because remember, a lot of this energy builds up before the actual aspect takes place. Yeah. So if tensions escalate and some, triggers are happening, some fears, some insecurities, doubts, things like that, I'm just going to ask that you please try not to react. Create some space, ask questions. Remember, I gave you that do's and don'ts of a Mercury retrograde, and that was do ask questions, don't shoot first kind of thing, right? Don't make assumptions. Give people the benefit of the doubt, because we're all walking around a little foggy right now. And what we may think and what we may say, not always lining up, or what we want versus what's actually happening may not line up right now. So again, space, grace, in the bigger picture, what really matters? That's what you're looking at, is the relationship, and I often say this, is the relationship more important than the subject matter? If it is, pursue it. Pursue the relationship, preserve the relationship, have the conversation or delay the conversation if needed. And if you are going to have a courageous conversation during this time, remember that it probably will take more than one conversation to resolve whatever the issue might be, right? Because the understanding or the comprehension can often be a little foggy during a Mercury retrograde. So the other thing I would imagine, I've heard from a few of you that this particular Mercury retrograde is bringing people from the past, some things that need to just, feel resolved, or it's just one of those like, hey, I've been thinking about you and you popped in my mind and how's it going? Let's catch up kind of thing. So that's cool, especially if you feel like you needed resolution or some sense of completion for that particular relationship or connection. Okay, so just to recap, this weekend, the full moon in Gemini, I'm going to have your full moon memes on my social media by sign. Remember to look for your sun, moon, and rising sign, and Mercury stationing direct. That also is going to play a part in how we think about life and ourselves and the kind of reactions or responses we have. And most of all, this weekend, give yourself permission to go socialize, get out of the norm, or if you're not that kind of social being, give yourself time to escape, if you will, into some sort of fantasy, whatever, that lets you let go of the reality, the hard realities that are maybe upon you right now. One last thing, if you're still watching to the end, I have to wish my daughter a very happy birthday, who shares one with a very special lady who I am privileged to call a client. And that happens to be on Saturday, the 14th. So happy birthday to both of you and anyone else celebrating birthdays this weekend and this week, all you Sages out there. And I hope that you have a wonderful week. Come find me at 12listen, jamiedawn.com. And I look forward to connecting with you. Have a wonderful week.